really excited to introduce, first I'm going to introduce the concept of how the panels are going to work today. We have 2 panels in the morning and 2 panels in the afternoon, and they're deliberately paired thematically to create some tensions and to create some, like a pairing. This one I think is complementary pairings, which we'll go into. This afternoons are going to be a little bit more kind of a difficult pairing, maybe like a fusion, an unexpected pairing. But we're going to talk for about a half an hour between the panels, and then we're going to talk among the panels. And then we're going to break out, and you should all break out, find a table. Please sit with people you don't know, that you haven't been sitting with. Try to kind of mix it up, work with some new people. And the panelists are going to kind of split our time among the tables. So you'll have a chance to talk with the panelists then. And then we'll all come back together and we'll share kind of some of the key takeaways from the table conversations and have a conversation about that as well. We have been working hard to prepare for these panels around the concept of provocations. And so people are going to be sharing thoughts that might make you feel a little bit uncomfortable, that you may disagree with, that you may have a really strong opinion on differently. Good. That's good. We shouldn't all agree here. Nobody here is the smartest person in the room. You are absolved of having to feel that way today. You can just be openly sharing your ideas, sharing them with others, and playing with them. So prepare to be provoked in a friendly way by our panelists. I'm going to first introduce our flexibility, Levers of Flexibility panel. Levers of Flexibility is about our practice. It's about how do we, if we're a kite, I guess, what adjustments do we need to make to the prevailing conditions? What's the right structure for us to be in? Things like that. So we'll talk about like the internal practice of user research. And before I introduce them individually, I will share that this panel is deeply divided on the topic of pineapple on pizza. So Greg is a no, Marissa's a yes. Joey, you said you need more data.
I do.
So
It's delicious, just maybe not with bread.
pineapple is good, not on pizza. I'm with you, but you know, that's something you can follow up with them on later. But please let me introduce first Marissa. Marissa came to us from San Francisco. She holds a degree from Stanford in computer science. She has about 20 years in UX and product design, from Adobe to LinkedIn to Apartment List, Shipped, and now she is the CXO of Acorns, where she leads a team that includes research and insights, but also product design, customer support, product development, and is responsible for the product development of core apps at Acorns. So welcome, Marissa. And then we have Joey joining us from Toronto. Joey holds a master's in sociology from the University of Manitoba and a PhD in philosophy from Ryerson University. She sprung from her career in academia to pivot to UX and ultimately to UXR Ops, which is where she is today as the UXR Ops lead at Wattpad in Toronto, a really cool company. And she brings a real focus on organizational behavior and business with consumer desires. So thank you for joining us, Joey from Toronto. And finally, we have Greg from the wonderful town of Athens, GA, which produces some great music, we have to say. Greg holds an MFA in graphic design, UX, and business from the Savannah College of Art and Design. And has had a UXR career in roles in media from Condé Nast and Vox, and now is head of UXR at Hearst. And he is also the author of a really incredible book called Research Practices, which if you haven't read it, Roy's nodding. Yeah, we know this book. It's a great book, gathering a lot of perspectives of people in the field. So check out Greg's book. And welcome, Greg. Thank you all so much for traveling from far and wide to be here today. And let's talk about flexibility. Greg, I'm going to start with you. With your background in media, you know, news, media, journalism, Cosmo. of those things. And your book, which you talk to so many people and you talk about researching researchers, you're an expert on us. How has that informed your perspective on flexibility of practice?
I would just like to say that I was told to prepare nothing but notes on beans after last night's dinner. I have no good material.
No further content. Well, let's talk about beans. I think everybody's into that.
No, first of all, thank you all for coming and thank you for having me. I was a designer for a number of years before I became a professor, and then I became a UX researcher, and I thought that that was unique, and I was a snowflake. And then when I set out to write my book on what it means to be a UX researcher, I realized we all have taken weird paths that require flexibility to go into what we're doing. I love our tribe of research people, but none of us have the same jobs. Marissa is in financial services, and my most recent project was on how to make Mark Wahlberg's workouts easier to find on menshealth.com. Like, same jobs, very different practices of those jobs. So I think
Were you successful in making them easier to find?
I'll let you know once we get. No, we weren't successful. You couldn't find it. Oh,
I couldn't find them.
Even if we have the same jobs, the researchers at Shopify and the researchers at Amazon, totally different. The researchers at DuckDuckGo and the researchers at Google Search, very different. So I think that shows that flexibility is a requirement of our jobs. Even if we think we have the exact same roles and responsibilities, who we work with, what our managers expect, the company culture, all of that is going to inform how we have to apply our jobs as researchers. So I think we have to be flexible. And that also means that we'll have career longevity. We have to be shapeshifters and adapt ourselves and our practices to what our organizations need at any given time, whether we're at a startup that's trying to find product market fit, or in my case, a century-old media company that is just trying not to rock the boat and is trying to remain profitable for as long as people buy magazines. So
Yeah.
I know that was a wide-ranging answer, but
No, it's great. Like, I think you're absolutely right. It is a requirement of researchers and research leaders to be flexible, but how do you prepare for that? Like, that's great to be responsive to changing conditions and to changing orgs, but like, that's a lot. What's your advice for like moving into that flexibility in a productive way?
I am trying to think of a concise answer for this, but at the end of the day, our job is to help our business partners make better decisions. They don't care how we do that. They don't care what our best practices are. They just want us to help them. And if we don't help them, they're still going to make decisions whether we're along for the ride or not. So I think if we have that mindset that we have to be flexible in order to provide value, I think that's the right way to make sure that people will depend on us and that we are providing the right information at the right time.
Yeah. Marissa, that's actually a good segue, and we all have mics, so like chime in whenever, but dangerous.
Now's a good time for beans again.
Do you want to talk about beans some more, Joey?
I could talk about beans forever.
We should definitely have maybe we'll stay late and have a separate panel on beans.
Forget about this pineapple and pizza question. What is your
all
favorite
about
bean?
I know. Oh my gosh.
I like mine refried with real lard.
Oh. We can't even go there, Marissa. My head is exploding. Okay. All right, Marissa, from your perspective, I know you have a ton of respect for researchers. We've worked together. I know that. But you come from a really different perspective, so kind of let us have it a little bit. Like, Greg is talking about his view on the importance of flexibility, but I think you've seen a lot of research leaders in your career, and like, what do you think, how has your perspective on flexibility changed over the years?
Yeah, and by the way, Julia's amazing. So thank you very much for inviting us. It was awesome to work with.
Thank you.
Someday I hope we work together again. So when I started out as a designer, and I was this IC designer. I worked with researchers, I worked with PMs, and research was like, I just thought it was like this function in the bowels of product development that helped ICs like me make these small decisions about our product, not like game-changing decisions. But as I grew as a leader and started taking on more and more of a company leadership role, and then seeing people like Julie and other research leaders embrace working with those leaders at a company level, I realized how important it is for research to have that seat at the table, for research to influence the big strategic questions, which market insights was already kind of doing, maybe CX insights at certain companies, and having that like mindset that, okay, how do I, like what Greg said, how do I influence that company leader making this decision that's going to make or break the business, not just working with an individual designer on what this particular user flow is like.
Yeah. And what would you say are like a few things UXR could do to get out of our own way?
Yeah, I got three. So the first one is, I believe we have to get rid of this dogmatic belief that no data is better than bad data. Second, I think that we have to stop gatekeeping research and saying researchers are the only people who can do research, or worse, you're not even allowed to talk to a customer if you're not a researcher. And third, it is that we have to represent the whole of our user or our customer, and not just report out individual research studies, this one particular methodology that we did and the insights that came from it, because those things are always going to be questioned.
I just want to chime in that one of the principles I have for my team is some data is better than no data. It's better than making decisions in a vacuum with no information whatsoever. So even if it's outdated or it's a small sample size, it's still better than nothing, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's interesting. I'm like nodding and agreeing, and of course I believe you logically, but there's also a part of me that's like, no, the data has to be perfect.
I know.
Can't
I
help
know.
it.
But here's
Sorry, I was going to say that isn't the value of bad data is still having people who are trained to know how to look at it and
Right.
then make the best possible, not just suggestions, but directives for business leaders. Like that is also where
Yeah.
research comes in. So bad data is great because you know what to say about it.
Exactly. And I say bad because we're supposed to be provocative. It's more likely imperfect, right? All research that you do is done within a context. And what I have found is when you present this research finding or whatever, and you say, oh, here's the caveat, right? People start questioning, well, that's a lab setting. Well, you targeted these. Well, the only people who fill out surveys are the ones who love you or the ones that hate you, right? And that makes it so that your data is being ignored, right? So if instead you can come in with, hey, like this is what we did, here's the context of it, it's still probably closer to right than not knowing anything at all. So as a leader, as a business leader, if I go and I act on certain data and I understand that context, then I can course correct if I'm finding that it's not quite playing out the way that I thought, and I'm probably closer to being right than if I am like, well, let me just make a decision on my own, and I don't really know, I'm going to guess, and then I have no idea which way to turn
Yeah.
to figure out my next step.
Well, definitely nobody wants executives making ideas having ideas just out of their own heads.
Some of us have some good intuition. I don't know.
All right, Joey. From your perspective, in ops right now, what are you thinking of all of this? How do you think ops plays a role in supporting flexibility and unlocking that potential in all these complexities?
So I will begin by saying that I think that if you're not using ops or using it effectively, that is where UXR will continue to stagnate. Provocation.
Yeah, I agree.
If you don't have ops, let's talk, because you need to. I can tell you what to do to get that set up. But the main blocker or challenge, is that where we should go?
Yeah, do it.
Okay. So the tricky part is ops. It's very easy to get stuck in what I've been calling triage loops. So if you have worked with ops, you've seen it happen before, where everything that is strategic and meant to drive research to various teams and across an entire company just gets stuck because something horrible happens and it has to be solved immediately. And especially, like Julie, the keynote that you began with, the presentation is, you planted the perfect seed for what my argument is here, because it's very easy to get stuck in these triage loops because we're up against major changes in the industry, economic layoffs, research not feeling respected. And so not leveraging ops will reinforce that. So if you get stuck in triage loops, it means, it's a complete failure to pass on information that is relevant to various business units to make these timely decisions. And instead, the other piece of it too is that you're not scaling. And so beautiful research will happen and new methods are being developed and it's not being cataloged and communicated and shared. And so all the researchers also fail to learn from each other. And I've seen this in a variety of companies in the last year. And this reinforces all of what we're talking about this morning, and that the feeling of being on the outside and having to scream, no, we're really important. And so really, really ensuring that you make room for scaling practices, especially from an ops perspective, is imperative for moving forward.
Yeah, I've personally seen the power of ops to just completely transform the way a team is perceived and behaving in an organization. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And I come from a bit of a unique background between the PhD and now, so working in partnerships and business development in startups. And so I bring all of that lens, and that's exactly it. So I see what's happening and people not communicating across teams and across departments. And it's heartbreaking because
Yeah, it is.
it's not, it's really easy to paint a simple solution, but building it into a practice is actually doable.
Yeah, I love that. All right, I'm going to turn to our second panel here. Thank you. We'll do a little bit of crosstalk in a minute. Obviously, so much we could be talking about, mostly beans. All right, welcome. So our second panel is called Anatomy of a Team. And this one is really about, if this was about practice and flexibility, this is about the structure. What are the bones? So, if we think about the physical body, if we're getting flexible and practicing yoga, what is the body? What is the correct body that we have? Or not correct, but the healthy body. Carl and Roy, are also divided, but I think they're going to be divided with most of you as well on a really important topic, that is coffee is life. Roy says no, which I think is confusing.
Just burns the gut. So.
And Carl needs more information on this, which is also confusing. But I disagree vehemently with both of you, but when we're finished talking about beans, coffee's a bean. We'll just add it into the conversation. All right, let me introduce Roy. Roy is coming to us from Ontario, where he dwells, but he hails from Kenya. He holds a master's in commerce, organization, and management from the University of North South Wales in Sydney, Australia. He's been in UXR and service design for a decade and is currently the head of research operations at Zapier. He is also the lead of a wonderful newsletter and podcast called Scaling Research, which if you don't tune into, you absolutely should. So welcome, Roy. Roy is also a People Nerds contributor, so thank you for that. I think I failed to mention, Greg is also a People Nerds contributor. Yeah, great stuff. And let me move on to Carl, who is also coming to us from Canada, from Toronto. So it's like
I feel a little overwhelmed.
Canada thing, not intentional, but welcome. Carl completed PhD studies in cognitive science and clinical psychology at the University of Toronto. And a really interesting path, which you should ask him about, ended up at IBM, where he has been now for 35 years. In various capacities in leadership of design and research, and currently is the Global VP of User Experience Research at IBM. He's also an industry professor at De Groot, heading up a class on exec MBA in digital transformation and enterprise design thinking, which is all very cool. So thank you, Roy and Carl, for being here today. And let's just launch right into it. Roy, when you think about team structures and the kind of so-called anatomy of a team, it changes, doesn't it? Tell me kind of what's going on with you at Zapier right now. Tell us kind of how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, for sure. I think, like many folks, our team went through layoffs, and it's one of those things you see happening in other teams, and you hope never happens to you. But you know, sometimes unfortunately that moment happens, and I think the team can be in a place. It's very easy to get into sort of the woe is me space. You know, we're not valued enough. How do we position ourselves better? But I think that moment where things change, when you become more constrained, is the moment for me as a leader to take advantage of in sort of a strange way. So I think being in this dynamic where we're all feeling that shift, or I guess the perception. I think the charts are helpful here, where it's not just UXR. There's something happening across our practices, but enabling our team to be in a place where, with the constraints we have, whether it's like a smaller team or fewer resources, creates a moment for us to actually be more creative, right? Like, how can we think about this differently? And it's actually a moment where I think there's more openness to change from leadership about who we are as a team, the way in which we can be effective, the way we should be structured.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what you're saying is true. The opportunities in the change, whether you're in hyper growth, which I think we've all experienced too, or kind of a more of a constrained environment, you still have to think of it in that way, right?
Yeah, because I think what the path you can go down is sort of being trying to be protectivist in a way, like trying to encircle the team. And I think you should take care of the team, right? Like, that's a really important piece of being a leader, is making sure they feel safe, making sure they have clarity about what's going on, but also just acknowledging where there is a moment in time to do something different. The environment has shifted such that there is an opportunity to do something different, and it's going to be much easier.
Yeah.
So those are the moments to not just get in a huddle, but actually think expansively. Like, this is a time to change something. Where in maybe previous times it would be a lot harder to push with leadership.
You know what I've learned over the years? Change is hard.
It is.
And people struggle with that. So what you're talking about is a lot of change. So can you share any kind of tips or things that you've learned or relearned about how to like manage big shifts in orgs and big changes that can occur? Because it requires people to change their thinking a lot and their practices. Sometimes everything's up in the air.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of time providing clarity about providing a vision and clarity about what success means, right? So, for us as a team, one of the things that have changed for us is our mandate is to accelerate learning in the org, right? And that's not something we talked about a lot before.
So that's your kind of team vision, accelerate learning.
That's what we're focused on, right?
That's very clear, yeah.
And for the team to be able to, in a moment of maybe elevated anxiety, obviously sadness, we've lost some folks that were really dear to us, and what does this mean for us, to be able to provide a clear pathway about how we're going to make a shift in terms of where we're positioned and the mandate that we're going to execute. So I think there's some level of, when there's change afoot and when that instability is there, there's an onus on us as leadership to provide more clarity, to provide more direction, and to be more forceful in that moment, so that there's at least that level of stability in terms of where we're going as a team.
And maybe that's something we can talk about in breakout groups too, is like, how do you find that within yourself, right? Like, you say that, and like, it's a very easy thing. Create clarity for a team. Like, I've been in that position where I'm like, create clarity. Like, where is that coming from? But you work together, you find it, you clarify your own thinking and stuff like that. So I think it's an interesting thing for us all to kind of think about. Yeah. Carl, what do you think? We've talked a lot about, I know you have some really cool thoughts on clarity too, and things you're doing on your team as well.
Yeah, it's worth saying that the 35 years that I've been IBM, I was attempted to be headhunted away from IBM about a year and a half ago. And I decided that my job was not done at the company in terms of really transforming it. And I told my boss at the time, I'm going to stay, but I'm going to call bullshit on anything that is not done correctly. And at my stage of career, I'd like to be able to do that now, and I do that a lot. So I really decided, I saw the same kind of signals. There was a lot of layoffs going on, so I decided that I would do two things. I would be defensive, so I took out ops as a term out of any part of my organization. Still do the work of research ops. I just don't call it that because it's, you got a target on you if you have that kind of term in my company. Also tried to be offensive. So I basically took an entrepreneurial approach to this thing. I basically put a pitch deck together and took it to a vice president, senior vice president that didn't really get the importance of research. Also thought that it was just basically usability testing, and that, well, what are we doing that's any different from product management? Don't
Does
you
this
just
sound
talk to
familiar,
people?
any of this?
Right? And so I just worked really hard. I did a listening tour of all of our researchers. I got about 300 of them around the globe. What they were feeling, the kind of questions that you've been asking here too, so to have some basis in where I wanted to go. So I put the pitch deck together. I saw it very much like a startup trying to get funding. That's what it is. I get the funding directly from this senior vice president. So I got the funding. It was a huge success, actually, with this particular guy. So we got more investment in research than any of the other functions of the company as well. So we've been hired 34 people this year, for example. But it was really also a focus on sort of being bold, calling bullshit type thing. And so we said, okay, look, they used to always be part of the design function. And we said, no, UX research is a separate discipline. If you see anything I'm writing, and sharing on LinkedIn, I'm leaning in really heavily with saying, no, it's not the case that we want to hire designers that have an interest in research. I'm doing in my hiring right now, I'm pushing back really hard on that, saying, no, UX research is a separate thing. The designers need to know how to do some research, the democratization question. Yeah, we got to do that in an organized fashion. We got a training program going on right now for product managers or any other adjacent discipline. They should know the philosophy of and some core methods of research, but they're not researchers. Just like if you teach somebody to do design thinking, I had one head of a business school that said after we went through a session on design thinking, said, well, now we don't need designers anymore, do we? I said, hell yeah. Just like if you know the basic sort of tenets of UX research, if the whole team has that, you're going to be more successful. But you still need to have that deep skill here as well. So I think there was a real focus on that. And the third theme is laying on really heavy on impact. And looking at, for example, senior vice presidents and CEOs love to look at the Gartner Magic Quadrant, the quadrant charts, right? I figure, okay, that's the way that I'm actually going to illustrate the impact that we're having. So we basically collect data on how much research we do. If you do a lot of research and you're having direct impact on the products you're building, then you're in the Magic Quadrant. And if you want to play to the way that senior executives think, that's a way to get them really fired up, because if they're not in that Magic Quadrant, they're going to be motivated to go down that direction as well. So I just think it's really all about seeing your part of the organization and being crystal clear to the decision makers on a regular basis. As you know, you don't just do it once a year. You do it on a regular basis, coming up, and at least that's what I do now in my organization, is really making sure that we're regularly showing the impact that we're having, taking every bit of insight that we get from a user and then wiring it in. We have some tooling that does that, wiring it directly into the roadmaps that product managers are generating. And then we can actually track what level of impact we're actually having through the cycle as well.
Yeah. Joey, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I wanted to jump in. So,
Yeah.
I mean, this is exactly it. One of the things that I've been trying to push for is when you finish a research project, don't just jump onto something else. We actually have to make sure we're tracking it and sharing it widely, and not just to the PM who we're working with, but to actually move it up towards the business unit, and then all the way up to president. Like these kinds of pieces of information get lost, and we quickly move on to the next research project and just lose track of it, and it devalues everything we're doing.
Yeah.
One other one I want to add about there's this notion that some 20, 25 years ago, I used to run workshops at design conferences, and at show of hands, who's the only designer in your company? And like 80% of everybody would say that, right? There's been an ascendancy of design now over all of that time. Design is in much better shape. UX research has been there all these years, but now is in this ascendancy, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I've been doing is also saying we want to staff optimally. That means that you don't just need one researcher on a project. You might need, in one case, I got 23 researchers on one project, because that's what that project needs, right? So we basically took researchers off of a lot of other projects that weren't as high priority, just to put them on the really important ones. And then there's the product managers and executives responsible for the ones that I took the staff from are like screaming.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Isn't
okay,
that the
so give
greatest?
me more headcount
Exactly.
to be able to staff your projects as well. But to optimize for success, you have to have the right level of staffing, as well, and not be doing the nice kind thing to, oh yeah, okay, we'll cover your project part-time. No, that's a mistake. I think we need to be really careful saying this is the kind of staffing we need, that's the kind of budget we need for that, and make sure then you have impact once you've actually got the staff as well.
Yeah.
Can I go back to one thing?
Yeah, please.
This is my provocation. Impact, I believe, is a trap. And here's why. Our work is so diffuse. How many people here have had your research findings maybe shelved and unused?
That's never happened to me.
Never happened. Maybe your product manager or your design director makes a decision that doesn't align with what you recommended in your research. What if your product marketing team does a really shitty job and nobody uses the product that you just researched? So impact, I understand the intention and I understand it's how we can prove our value, but proving our value is also a trap because there's so many variables that go into our work that it makes it impossible to make a one-to-one connection. So that is my provocation.
Oh, that's a good one. And that's a good segue, because we're going to wrap up our panel. And does anybody else have any last provocations that they want to just lob out there?
I'll throw out one
Okay.
that kind of relates to impact as well, and something that I've seen and that what I position my researchers to do, even though they're researchers and not necessarily like insights analysts. Every single time a research study is presented on my team, I ask the researchers to go and talk to customer support, talk to the people who run NPS, talk to, or go and look at the app reviews, app ratings, go and talk to the data analysts. And in your presentation, make sure to include things that relate from those groups with the research that you just did. If they match, great, your research will be listened to more, because executives pay attention to things like data, hard data analytics, I mean. If they don't, now you're going to get into real talk, because why doesn't the data agree, and how do you make sense of that? So that's my challenge to all researchers.
Triangulation, my favorite.
I have one which didn't talk too much about, but it's about where UXR reports into. And we talked about UXR reporting into design, into product. I'll report into ops as well. I don't actually think it matters. I think that what matters is the person that you're reporting into. Because I've had people in design who have been great and horrible. I've had people in product who have been great and horrible. I've had people in ops who have been great and horrible. The thing that matters the most is that person and how much they're going to advocate for you and your practice. So I think the conversation about design and product doesn't actually matter.
It's a red herring, yeah. All right.
I'll add one really quick
Okay.
one. That I think that we need to make sure that when we're focusing on discipline, that the UX research discipline needs to upskill significantly.
Yeah.
People talk about being a qual or a quant. You got to be both. You got to be phenomenal, right? And so you've got to democratize UX research across. But that also sets the expectation for researchers to actually be significantly skilled up as well.
Yeah.
And I also think, so I agree with also grabbing data from all the other touch points that you have in the company. I think a lot of those should be automated. That's what I'm working on significantly in terms of instrumenting, all of the products that we have, so that so that's the continuous collection of information about what feedback we're getting. So researchers don't have to do all the heavy lifting, but then to be able to have the insights to say, oh, here's where we need to do an episodic study to really sort of dig in deeper as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. Joe, you want to bring us home?
I'll bring up AI for a quick second and just figure out, I think the provocation is what can we do? How can we actually oh my God, everybody's always thinking this anyway, but like maximizing how we use AI so it doesn't replace us. And so that's bringing back the human part. So how do we actually properly communicate with each other with the tools that AI provides us?
Yeah. 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 Wonderful. All right, well, we're gathered our amazing panel back up here to share some of their reflections based on the conversations that they have had with all of you, but also this should be interactive. So you might get called on to share a perspective that you had, or you might want to elaborate on something or share something with the larger group. So please, going back to what I said earlier, nobody here is the smartest person in the room. We're all pretty smart up here. But you are also very smart, so please participate in this conversation. But Carl, you want to kick us off with some of the highlights from the tables?
I would love to. And I think, these are the best conversations ever. People that were in the two groups that I just talked to. And the first one, and I want to celebrate and thank the team for challenging me right when I sat down, saying it's fine to say all these things in a 280,000 person company that has all these, and all the kind of things that I was saying. I really appreciated saying, oh, but I've only got 10 researchers in my organization, so all this lofty things that I was talking about, how would it apply? And then we went into a discussion that was, I think, very effective of saying, well, could you use the principles of prioritization? Could you think of, whatever? And that went really well, I think. And then we also talked about this notion, like we don't have extra staff to go, put a research repository together, for example. And then we had this discussion on different people around the table having experience with very simple, ways of capturing data. We talked about Airtable. Half the table, I think, really loved Airtable, and then there was a challenge back saying, yeah, but it's fine when you see the results of after you've done all the setting up of the Airtable and the like. But I think that was a pretty good insight as well. And then a lot of talk starting with the team over here about impact, how we can actually be tracking impact. And then when I had the conversation with the team over here, we got deeply into impact. What measures should we actually be using for impact? We talked about that if you've got SUS scores, but the senior executive team doesn't know what that is. What kind of measures can you actually look at? And can we even look at the correlation between the measures that we use that are deeper in terms of understanding the user and how they relate to things like retention and how important that is? So the measures that the company cares about as well. Talked a lot also about the relationship between the various insight functions, sort of market research and reporting. One organization reporting into market research, how does that impact the way that you do the UX research work? Another organization ripped themselves out of design and now report into strategy, and that's also an interesting sort of year of struggle. Apparently, really sort of difficult relationships between working with design and the like, and then also, and one of the other team members is just in the process now of actually figuring out what the relationship should be between research and like market research and UX research. In my case, at IBM, we actually nothing to do with me, but basically got rid of the market research function, and they've got 7 left apparently, and responsibility was given to me to fill in the gaps. But I was reminded that in the book, inspired by Marty Kagan, a really good book that you should all read in terms of how it's instruction for product managers basically, and he doesn't quite get, he does as a real person, he's like very well known in the product management area, but if you read my blog post about his book, you'll see that he has, since writing the book, talked a lot about the importance of UX research and the like, but it doesn't come through that book. But there's a good quote in there saying that nobody used market research to invent a successful product. It really takes UX research and its insights directly working with people, getting those unmet needs and the like to be able to come up with an idea for a new product. But you still need to have market research information, like as well. But there was a lot of talk about that there's that different functions are doing the same thing. And are not necessarily sharing it with one another. So I think that's one of the other challenges of our field is to align and ideally maybe be part of one organization. But I think, as you had said before, Roy, too, it doesn't matter who you're part of. My sort of insight always is that it's the people. That if you're really, like in my case, I still report to design because I'm reporting to a person that's been the best manager I've had in 35 years, so I'm not changing. If she ended up being head of product, fine, I'd report to her as well. But so I think there really is something about the people that you're working with and aligning with people that you really can understand deeply. But I think the themes were, I think, directly foundational to the kind of issues that we're dealing with here. And I think the last team I was with, I was asking sort of, what are you going to take back, from the discussion? And so a lot of the talk about this notion of prioritization being key, this alignment of the organization, trying to make metrics, like I said earlier, something that can be understood, not just by us and together with product management and design, but even up to the SVP and CEO level as well, was really key.
Yeah. There's so many threads to pull on there. I'm curious if anybody has, in the kind of do and dream category, like anything that came up either from the panelists or anybody on insight integration, on working with other insight groups across the organization that can maybe help unlock things for some people who are in the earlier stages of that. Anything come up?
Sort of.
Good.
My table, which was excellent. We talked a little bit about repositories and using those as a way
Yeah.
to share or
Bridge
not
some
share
of those
insights.
gaps.
Yeah. And we were pretty divided. Some folks have had success with them, but also some folks have shied away because you can still misconstrue the data that's within a repository. So it goes back to who is the person who should be sharing the work and providing the necessary context around it. But we didn't really have a clear answer on the value or how to set up a repository effectively.
Yeah. Well, the repositories are definitely one of the more difficult conversations that we tend to have. Yeah, Steph. Nope.
There you go.
Okay, I'm getting in here. We'd had the debate about repositories as well, and I'm really curious to talk tomorrow a little bit about how AI plays into making these repositories actually useful, because they often are not. In terms of working across disciplines, another thing I brought up from my experience is that we often talk about having empathy for the users, but we don't always look for developing empathy for the other disciplines within our organization. I had to learn all about engineering, which I never knew about, in order to collaborate better with engineers. And I had to develop that empathy and do research on them to understand how to reach out to them.
Yeah, that's great.
On that note, we in the group that I was in, we were talking a lot about the concept of role and relationships, and a really incisive point came out, which was that researchers are the therapists of a company. And I want to say that the flip side is also what we talked about is maybe being like one of the themes was what's the role, but are we a little too self-important? Because if we're thinking of ourselves as therapists, if we're thinking of ourselves as constantly being undermined and nobody listens, well, is that true, first of all, but is it also, are we building that into how we were relating? And then, to that point about being therapists, though, the tension came up about a conversation, or being therapists, but in partnership, right? And so the concept came up of, say just for instance, you're having a conversation with a PM, and that thing comes up, and I think a lot of us have had that experience of I told you that thing, and the tension between having to moderate how you use your words and feeling the phrase that came up was babysitter tone. Did I get that right? I can't see where you are. But so the babysitter tone and having to not do that. And so I'm throwing a lot of stuff out here, but thematically about role and relationships. And so, it is provocation. Do we feel like we need to use babysitter tone all the time?
I'm looking at Sally. Actually, we used to joke at LinkedIn that we were the Department of Broken Records. And we didn't share that with our partners, but it revealed a lot about, I think, how we felt about that. Like, we feel like we've told you this, but let's just go over it again. And that doesn't put us in a great position, right? Like, nobody wants to be babysat. Like, what does that say? I think it's a great provocation, actually, of like, what does that say about how we see our place in this in this relationship, right, in the discourse that we're having with people. It's not very healthy. So that's a good like orthodoxy for us maybe to think about is like, what if we weren't the Department of Broken Records, right? What if we didn't feel that way? What if we didn't feel like we had to be babysittery? What's holding us back from that? Can we get a mic over?
I feel like I've been on a lifelong quest to not use PowerPoint. I apologize if there's anyone from Microsoft here. Nothing against it as a software, but as a way to communicate the results of our research, I'm just always looking for the most immersive way to do that as possible. Because I think, and this is not to say that this is the cure-all for not becoming the Department of Broken Records, but I think creating a way where there's a shared ownership of what we learned in the research is how to ensure that it will stick. And to me, that's PowerPoint is rarely the tool,
Yeah.
or Keynote or whatever. So to me, that's, and I'm in a different environment than I've been in for my whole career as a consultant for many decades, and now sort of working in an in-house team. I'm looking at my colleague Greg. That's why, and I'm finding it that to me is definitely sort of a struggle figuring out how to create immersive ways of engaging people with the research. And also in the era of remote work as well.
Yeah,
It becomes
I
a
love
challenge.
that.
But I'd love to hear what people are doing.
Yeah, and I bet there are people out here in the audience who are like, I don't feel like we're the Department of Broken Records. Like we've overcome that. Please share how you did that. And
Yeah. Testing. Check, check. All right, cool.
you're on. Hot mic.
Interestingly, I hear that there is like being a broken record is an element of frustration, but I feel like that's also a part of, there's an aspect of that that's part of the role of keeping an insight fresh and on top of people's minds. I think relying on repositories, slides, or even immersive experiences starts taking a passive position in the insight. And so I think there's an aspect of efficiency that we have to achieve, but I feel that it is our responsibility to, at the very least, be a bit of a squeaky wheel, because there are, like, our organizations are constantly growing, constantly changing, new people coming in, and over time, you know, UX, our insights are
Right.
creating a pretty rich body of work that people aren't going to dig into. They're not going to seek out. They need to be sort of shown that information and shown that knowledge. And so I think it's about the tone at which we repeat that communication, and maybe the process through which we do that.
Right. And another thing that kind of helped me flip the broken records thing too is like something that my sister Steph and I talk about sometimes is like, I think that it's obvious and that everybody should know this thing because I know it so deeply. I am like living it and feeling it and breathing it, but you don't know it. So why should I feel resentful that I'm telling it to you or telling it even to you 10 times? You've got a million things going on. Like, remove that resentment. Just be like, I'm treating this as fresh, even if it's not, right? This is fresher. We're bringing something new to it. And I love the idea of action and insight. Like, an insight isn't, that's why repositories are like a very hard thing for me, because a line and an Airtable or something like that, like, that's not active. What's somebody supposed to do with that? Like, our job is to bring that to life, right? Sorry, I'm on a little soapbox here.
I wanted to actually amplify the point that was made there earlier about empathizing with the other disciplines. So we did a bunch of interviewing of PMs saying, how do you want, the insights?
Yeah.
Do you want to have a big keynote, or we don't use PowerPoint, we use Keynote, but do you want a keynote presentation?
Yeah.
Or do you want to just work together on what that insight is and translation of that into, an epic in AHA,
Yeah.
which is our tool we're using? That's what they want. They want to shorten. They want the distance between the insight that we got from a user and getting it into the very thing that's going to drive it into the product. And you don't have to necessarily have this whole presentation or like a recording. Like, we have a big repository, and I when I first took the job, it existed, and I went through a whole lot of it. And I think, why did we spend an hour presenting all this stuff? The net of it was all of like maybe 5 minutes worth that needed to get into the product or whatever. A lot of the rest of it was context or whatever, right? And I find that we should be even, if we're going to do presentation, it should be in that forum, but I think it should just be a collaboration, a conversation,
Yeah.
and some metrics or whatever, but I think we need to empathize with our users, our internal users.
Yeah, actually, Taylor from my team, who's here somewhere, she's actually in the process of doing this right now. There she is, with our executives and our internal stakeholders to say, like, how do you want, she's embarking on a really big foundational project, how do you want me to deliver this to you? Like, how can I best communicate this to you in a way that's not pushing it, but like we're all involved in that as well, which has been really great.
That came up in one of our groups as well, but more in the context of impact that you had brought up. And how do you know that you're making impact and what's the best way to make impact? And let's see, Amber, you shared something that I thought was awesome and required a little bit of bravery on the part of the researchers. So can you share?
Hello. All right. I honestly, it's not groundbreaking, but I just shared that I spoke up in a space where I'm gonna call it like it is, Julie. Okay.
You can.
Where we can
want
count
to.
the number of Black people in the room. I know that sometimes understanding doesn't come as easily as I may have wanted it to, and so looking for impact and value and trying to come up with that articulation and those words wasn't always easy for me. So I found my advocates, but that also meant that I had to kind of bypass my manager at times. And I had to say, hey, Nikki, we met at the water cooler. I like your hair, I like your kicks. That's where it starts. And then we learn each other. And then I said, hey, can you tell me what value the research or that I'm bringing to your team is? And then she gave me the language, and I'm using Nikki obviously as an example here, but she gave me the language to know what impact I was bringing to the table as a UX researcher, because as someone who was new at the time and who didn't look like everybody, I didn't know what words to use for people to hear me. So instead of kicking and screaming, I was like, can you just tell me what it is I do well for you? And that worked for me.
That's so powerful. Thank you, Amber.
And I liked when she brought that up as well, because you said, I remember you were saying that there were junior people on the team, or even you yourself was junior at the time, and having that kind of like proactiveness. And John, actually, in my second group as well, put your hand up so he can bring you a microphone. He also talked about build relationships, and I was kind of pressing him a little bit. I was like, no, tactically, how do you do that? And he's saying all the things around like empathizing and things like that. I'm like, no. Like you're
actually.
in Chicago, I'm in San Francisco. I just started at the company. I've never even heard your name. How do you do that? So can you talk a little bit about that and your catchphrase for that?
Sure. Oh. Is it on? Hi. I'm John from Samsung. I guess I accidentally stumbled on the phrase being a good nuisance, and just sort of not nagging, but like being there and making sure that the things that I'm trying to tell you, that I'm speaking the language that you're speaking, that I understand your needs, that I can try to help you with that. Just sort of be a nuisance and sort of be there when you need me and demonstrate that expertise and demonstrate that I understand what's important to you, so that when I come by the next time and the next time, it's maybe less of a nuisance and more like, oh, all right, well, this guy over here.
This guy again.
Yeah, but, and so we all move forward together. I will say for people who are junior on the team, like at the previous company I was at, we ended up creating like actionable sheets that sort of demonstrate like these are the key things. If you take anything from this sheet of paper right here, it's like these are the 5 things that you need to know about like the fundamentals of what we do. And like you can come ask me questions by all means, but like these are the 5 things that you have to know to move forward and be successful with understanding the user or their physical constraints or whatever it is. So yeah.
I think there's something really powerful in that about like articulating your work and your intentions in a really clear way, because there is a lot of that. Nobody really understands research, or there's a lot of fear about that, but there's a lot of reality about that too. And just like really simple, clear things. Like I remember at LinkedIn once, there was all this like, we don't know what you all do. And I just like, okay, let me just break it down. We do foundational work, formative work, and evaluative work. And I made like a little Venn diagram and blah, blah, have shift through words. Everybody was like, oh, That's really helpful. So like these simple frameworks we can share make a huge difference for our teams.
I think that's totally true, but I'm just it's just coming across me now. But isn't this is going to be an ongoing thing for
Yep.
researchers? We're the curious ones. We're willing to be vulnerable and introspective, and we're always going to be asking, "Are we doing the right thing?" And I don't think that that's a. I'm realizing like, oh, we should just pretend like we know exactly. Like it's we're the imposter syndromes for what we're doing, like in our roles. We don't see other folks do that. They probably do though. But anyway, the whole point is, what if that's just built into it?
Yeah. What if it's a feature, not a bug?
That's right. Like what if that's what we bring? That's actually what we bring is being able to be vulnerable and introspective.
I think that's a really interesting tension, kind of in the kite metaphor for us to pull on is like, how can we still be free and be curious and be those people that we are, but also be like grounded and tethered and make sure that people know this kite's not just going to bust off and fly away. Like, what are you people even doing? You know, there's a balance between having to create some boundaries and some clarity and some of that freedom as well, because I think that is a unique kind of quality that we bring to business conversations, but it's kind of at our own peril in some ways, right? Or at least it feels that way. I don't know. Carl, it felt like you were about to say
I was
something.
going to say that, yeah, I had a supervisor years ago when I was in clinical psychology, and he always made the point that the disciplines that we're in don't have a house in which to practice. So if you're in, clinical psychology in a hospital, for example, it's medicine. That is the core. Every decision is made. They're never going to be kicked out, right? And same thing with if you're in a technology company, engineering is the foundational discipline. So we're always sort of a guest, if you will. So we always need to make our work known. We need to constantly advocate for ourselves. There are times when we're really doing well. Look at all the companies that no longer have chief design officers over the last year. Companies that you thought were, including Apple, companies that you thought were just really got it in terms of this whole focus on design and research. And so it constantly has to be part of our role to make everybody aware of why this is important. It's weird that we have to do that, especially for UX research, when you think of that. We're the ones that actually provide that insight to be able to know what the hell you're doing as a company. And somehow people don't get that naturally is really weird.
It's like the most important thing that nobody understands.
Exactly. It's the best kept secret in a company that, what about you had this dedicated research staff that are going to tell you what your clients want and evaluate how well you're actually delivering on that. Such a simple thing, right? And to think that companies think they can do that without it, but we still need, because we're not engineering.
I'm so curious about
we
that.
need to
'Cause-
do that.
Go ahead. No, I was going to pitch something out there.
I was keying off of it sounds so simple. I think the executives want and they understand that they want to know, is their product working well, or get feedback in order to steer their direction. What they don't know is, why do I have to hire a researcher to do that, right? And so we talked at one of my tables about there's always this inherent tension when it comes to that democratization. Because on the one hand, we as researchers are like, yes, we should democratize and you can do some stuff and free up my time to do other things. But on the flip side, we're like, wait, but we're valuable, please keep us employed, right? And so Martha, can we get a microphone? I just thought this was so fun, the way that she kind of tackled this with something she did that had two different purposes behind it.
Yeah, I had sort of a super double secret purpose, but a great inclusive curriculum to help my colleagues. Is when I worked at Accenture, kind of understand what we do in research and how to do it well. So I created a course called How Not to Suck at Interviewing, because I think that's one of the things that it's very easy to assume interviewing someone, it's a piece of cake. You just sit down and talk to them. Well, as we all know, I'm sure everyone in this room, there's actually a ton of skill involved. It's very hard to do. It's very hard to do it well. And so my intent with the course was to, actually we had an interesting conversation at the table about the word democratization and how we need a better word, because I think it's a reality, and it's open the gates to the castle of research, but in an effort to kind of help teach, I created this course, which it did. It sort of helped explain this is how you do it well, and this is how to practice it, because you're only going to get good at it by practicing. But it's sort of the double secret motivation was to help my students understand how hard it is, and that you need expertise in order to do it well, and that actually their assumption that anyone can do it was flawed. And so I think I accomplished both goals quite well.
Yes. Talking to people is not interviewing people. Yes.
Yeah, at my company, we did something similar at a like on-site that we had. It was about 100 people, various disciplines, product engineering, design, customer support, and the researchers ran a workshop on how to not ask leading questions. And they would put up a question and they're like, how would you reword this to not be leading anymore? And it was like dead silent, or the few brave people who tried to give an option, and the researchers are like, not quite. So I think by the end of that, people were really like, oh, I need to, let me come and talk to you next time. Like, you know, and again, it wasn't to scare them off from doing it at all, but maybe to get into that, hey, like, even if you're going to do something, why don't you run it by us and we can read it quickly and give you some pointers or tips, or take the really big projects on ourselves and work with us.
Yeah.
My perspective is that as researchers, we are here to help people make better decisions. So to me, that democratization, similar to impact, is also a trap. Like, it's part of our job. We're supposed to help people and give them what they need to make better decisions, including training them, give them documentation, creating templates.
Yep.
But I'm going to put Tammy Tayo on the spot. Where are you? You felt that democratization was not something that we should be doing. And I was curious if you wanted to explain your point of view.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, actually, I do think we need democratization, but I just think we need to be very thoughtful in how it is that we implement it. Put in guardrails, right? Finding platforms like, you know, DScout or other competitors to help automate, I think, is where I stand. And there are other people that just feel as though we should have everybody do research, which to me really defeats the purpose. Because when you're thinking of expanding what UXR is, part of that is making sure that we're doing due diligence and expanding that. And it means we've got to get people that are upskilled, people that can actually do this and do it well. And if we're not very thoughtful in how we roll out democratization, how then do we expand this, right? How do we make sure that we're vetting these people? How do we make sure that the processes and things that we are doing is actually well thought out? And you can't do that by just saying, yeah, everybody else should do it. So yeah, I think we could do democratization. We just got to be very thoughtful in how we approach it and how we implement it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think there are some kind of upsides that Martha was talking about a little bit too. Is like, once you start training people and educating them and opening the, you know, gate to the castle, people realize this is harder than I thought, right? So there's kind of some respect that starts to build as we do that. At least in my observation.
Time consuming.
It's very time consuming and
Really
difficult, it
time-consuming.
turns
And
out.
that's when you get into specialist roles for any discipline,
Yeah,
right? Is,
yeah.
oh, we need a specialist for this because it's taking my generalists too much time to do that particular thing.
Yeah. Roy, I know you had some great conversations too.
Yeah, I was with table 3 and 4. Shout out to best tables here. Sorry, the rest of you, but I'm biased. The best tables ever. You know, there's this connected conversation around that tension of being connected to design. You know, one of the things that we talked about. Sorry, I forget your name. I forget all your names. So I'm really sorry. I should have written them down, but it is what it is. You know, being sort of on the design side and how we interact with, say, like a voice of customer, right? As much as maybe some researchers here dread NPS, which I know there are some among us, don't have to put up your hand, but it's all good. I understand. The reality is, whether it's NPS or something else, use of voice of customer, it's a really powerful program that execs pay a lot of attention to. So how do we marry this whole, we're going to also be strategic. We're also going to like come together with other insights groups, but still maintain some level of control. So like how do you structure things so that can happen? Also, really interesting conversation about doing strategic work and the benefits of being close to strategy, but also the decoupling from the practical work that goes on and being able to be connected into the on the ground effect of product work. So these are sort of tensions that I think are not. I don't think there's like a full answer, but the dream of, hey, it'd be great to have like an insights person on exec, but also as we talked about, there's 1,000 engineers and like 2 researchers. So there's probably not going to be a VP research in all these companies, or a chief insights officer. So how do we sort of marry all of these tensions? No like clear answer, but I think some interesting ideas that popped up. I think another one, Joni like caught the tail end of this conversation, was being close to the money. Being able to, like a really good example, again, sorry I forget your name, but really closely tied to what the CEO cares about, which is money. And so the framing of research or insights around like what are the potential downstream effects on this revenue-wise. I think a question in my mind is like how do you scale that to teams? Like, I think something that's married to this is having skin in the game. Like how do you have skin in the game in a way that maybe is not the same as product management, but is closer than we have been, right? And I think that's also connected to being closer to the money. So these are like really challenging ideas to try and implement, whether you're a small team or a larger team. But I think they're all connected to how you structurally, how UX are structured and placed within these orgs to really have an effect. So call out to any one of y'all who talked about these things. I think they're definitely worth sort of saying in your own words. So feel free. Actually, I'd love any one of you to talk on any of those points.
Roy's
right?
waving his hands over here,
The
so I am
incredible
too.
3
Anybody
and 4
over there
tables. Yeah.
want to chime in? Okay, cool.
I'm Brian. I work for Providence Big Health System. I probably talked about VOC a little bit. I invite them into my projects. I'm a service designer now, but like, why fight that? I mean, usually our insights are aligned and go deeper even. So I think it gives the business types comfort when they see our insights, but then it's also backed up maybe in a little footnote somewhere of, hey, did you see this VOC report, or did you see this white paper or this literature review? It just puts wind in our sails. So I say, embrace it all.
Yeah. It's actually a good segue. We're going to be talking a lot about this type of thing, the money. We're going to be talking about the money this afternoon a little bit, and lots of other interesting topics. So it's a good segue. We have about 10 minutes left. I'm wondering if there were any other highlights that we wanted to.
Yeah, I realized, so I want to make sure table 7 is properly represented because I completely ignored you. I want to say sorry. But if anybody from table 7 here wants to share some highlights that you talked about, maybe just like one or even just one key point. I'll make one up if you don't.
Table 7, where are you at?
I'll talk about beans. Greg's interested too.
An ode to beans. Okay, well, while table 7 prepares their thoughts, Greg, did you have any other highlights you wanted to share?
I just was looking at my notes, and this is something Joey touched on, but somebody at our table 9, best table, sorry, other folks.
Table 11, you know you're the best.
Somebody noted that engineers will take credit. We built and shipped that thing. Designers will take credit. We designed and shipped this thing that people are using. Researchers do not. We don't take credit. We don't take ownership because, again, the impact is diffuse, like I mentioned earlier, but we are diplomats. We are collaborators. And I was curious if anybody here has maybe a different opinion or can speak to maybe why we are so loath to take credit for our work. Maybe you do take credit, and I'm curious how you do that. Doesn't have to be table 9. It could be any of the other lesser tables.
I don't have an answer to it, but to build on it, it's making me think of something else that maybe is a little bit related, but because I think Julie was talking about being strategic earlier and how being strategic, involves opinion. And a big conflict and tension that I've been thinking about that's been at the back of my mind is, I fancy myself a very strategic researcher. I think part of why I, have moved into leadership is because of the ability to make my research very strategic. And I think being strategic has overlap with like taking ownership and having strong opinions. But I have this tension in the back of my head that I'm worried about, which is I feel like the more strategic I am as a researcher, the less objective and more biased I worry that I'm bringing that to my research practice a little bit. And those two things, being strategic and being objective and unbiased, to me feel like a big tension. And I'm a little worried about it. And so, yeah, I'm just curious if others, for some reason, taking ownership reminded me of that, I think, because it's like we're the diplomats, we're the objective ones. But then you kind of have to play the game.
Yeah. I always encourage my team to like just be clear about what you're talking about. Like now I'm talking about the findings. Now I'm talking about, the results of this study. Okay, now I'm talking about my perspective on that. When I'm bringing in my business acumen, my experience, all of triangulating all these other things. Now I have an opinion and recommendations and implications based on that. So just being like really clear when you're doing one or doing the other can help.
Getting to the question of how we can take credit, I have found the hard way, particularly when performance reviews come, that if you're not really specific about what you've done, then you might not be in a place where decisions are being made. And so I've become crazy explicit about what I've accomplished. Like, drivers would not be getting paid what they're paid without my mental model of earnings, period. Like, it wouldn't. We wouldn't have built these features if I didn't know if I didn't do the 10 pain points kind of thing. Like, it's almost like writing your resume kind of thing. And it feels uncomfortable because that isn't who we are as people. We're mostly introverts. But it's this is a kind of business, right? And so, and then you kind of feel proud about what you've done.
Yeah, and I think as leaders, like if we switch our hats from like researchers to research leaders, like it's our job to make sure our teams are getting credit, to insert that when it's not being recognized. If engineering and product are taking credit, Marissa can, and lots of people remember, like all these big celebration emails would go out about shipping a product and research wouldn't be mentioned. I'd be right away, reply all, like, also, here's the research team that did all the research to support this. And eventually that stopped happening. People started including that.
I think that there's also a fear that people have. And I've seen this on the design side. I've seen it on the research side. I see it in product management as well, but it's like, too bad, that's my job. And that's signing up for the actual impact of your influence. Because it is really easy when something fails for you to be like, broken record,
Fading into
I told you so,
Well,
right?
yeah.
I knew the finding. If you would have listened to me, that would have been successful. It's a lot harder to say, I believe so much in these findings. If you make this decision, I will share whether it succeeds or not. And you're like, but I don't have all that business side. That's the empathy
Or I don't have
for
the-
your partners. Sometimes you build the thing and it works really, really well and it still fails. And it followed all the research and still failed because sometimes build it and they don't come, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why business leaders are making decisions based on a lot of different inputs, not just research, and it's safe to be like, oh, but this is my role,
true.
right?
I think there's a lot
and
of
it's
truth
hard.
to
I have a hard time with that. I am responsible for metrics, actual metrics at the company that I do not 100% control. And it's scary, but that's what leaders are looking for. So be brave, I guess.
Yeah, be brave. Yeah.
That was one of the discussions that we had in the team over here, the perceived disagreement between Greg and myself in terms of the owning impact, right? And my argument was that if we don't go down that path at all, then we never get to have any credit for what we've done. I think it's on us as researchers, especially quantitative researchers, to actually analyze that in a way that, for example, some years ago, I did a study that looked at basically hierarchical regression on dependent measures of customer satisfaction and revenue, and a whole bunch of factors like number of users bringing into studies, a whole bunch of different variables. And we got to the outcome of these three variables could explain something like 27% of the variance in revenue. We haven't done that for a number of years. I want to get back there again. So then you can say, okay, you know what? The big debate about, well, we had some input to this. Well, you can quantify that. That's our responsibility as researchers to up our game and don't just do the study and leave it there and say, well, I think we had impact with it. I think we should be upping our game to actually be able to do it.
I love it. That's a great note for us to, I just want to, we have a few minutes left. Anybody holding on to anything up here, out there, something you disagreed with or you know, yeah, or agreed with?
Hi, yeah, my name is Kristen, and just like a quick thing about kind of taking credit, and I feel like a lot of times we as researchers wait until we have a really impactful finding that we think that can go all the way through, and we don't do a great job of kind of like showing our work throughout, right? Like we're not a kind of constantly updating people on how things are going, and a lot of to the point earlier about we don't move fast enough sometimes, right? Or that's a perception. I think that sometimes just like, I just got out of an interview, this was like an amazing quote kind of thing. Like you're just like kind of keeping in the top of people's minds, right? Like it doesn't always have to be a perfectly worded deck or summary finding, right? Like, but to just be kind of constantly putting your work out to your stakeholders, to your collaborators, you know, and I think that then keeps you front of mind in terms of the entire initiative or the entire project or development of that feature or whatever it is. So then when it comes time in the end, they're like, oh yeah, remember when we learned that thing, right? Like as opposed to just like a real build up, here's a push and then I'm gone again because I'm working on this.
I think it's a great reframe of impact. Like we think of impact as like this big thing. It's like boom, impact. You can see the cartoon explosion, but impact can be little, right? Like little tiny things that you do throughout the day, the week, the month, the year, that add up to those big moments.
But exactly to that, and Kristen, thanks for raising that, because the flip side is, or not the flip side, but I see it all the time, is being too protective of wanting the data and information we share to be exactly what we want to go out into the world. But that's back to bad data, you know, in quotes, just rough data, whatever. Bad data is better than no data. And so exactly to that, just sharing quickly, widely, and being a part of decisions quicker.
Yeah.
One other thought that when you think of like what Intel did with Intel Inside, because it was like it wasn't something you could see. Well, a lot of the work we do is not observable. Like you said before, somebody's writing the code, somebody's doing the design. What did we, contribute? So I think we have to do that extra step, and it really depends on what your organization is. Like the conversation you had, if you have a small team, like you've got all the impact that you've had in your head, right? And you share it with the leadership team. And like in my company, it's huge. And so actually, I do an executive dashboard and an executive newsletter once a quarter that communicates things, and I have like journalists, people that have journalism backgrounds writing the content, so it's not what a researcher would write.
Yeah.
It's like they take the stuff the researchers wrote and put it into really catchy headline and really all that huge value to this, because here's all the senior executives in the company reading this stuff saying, I had no idea, including things like, we did this piece of research that killed this project. That's not an impact in terms of like, well, now here's the success of the market, but here's the money we saved in terms of what we didn't do. So I think you have to figure out what's appropriate for your organization. My mind is always big because we've got a large company, but I think doing the equivalent in your organization, but making your equivalent of Intel Inside in terms of its UXR inside, if you will.
Well, I don't know about you all, but I'm envisioning insight inside based on that. That's going to be smacked on every darn thing that goes out. We have time for one more question or comment.
Yay. Both?
Great.
Both. It's actually building on two things that Carl, you said. Going back to Marty Kagan, he really emphasizes the product engineering design triad, which we adopt at Squarespace. And I found that one of the most useful relationships that we've built through that is through engineering, because they understand the tech debt that at least we face a lot. And if a insight isn't adopted or something isn't built the way that our team has recommended, we always go ask and say, why? Why? And then they always come back with really insightful explanations, which helps us deliver our insights more effectively. The second thing was talking about something you said when we first began this discussion like an hour and a half ago about making research a scarcity. I found that if we have staffed a team that is not basically treating our researchers well or the insights well, we get them out of there. Like, it's not a good use of that person's time. It's not setting us up for winning or like perception. And so I would encourage people to do that more often.
Huge plus one to those points. One is I think that we need to become, so I want Marty Kagan in his next revision of the book to be talking about 4 in a box and not 3 in the box, because we deserve to be that 4th box, quite frankly, but we have to earn it. Right?
I love
And I
that.
think the other point about taking people off projects that aren't successful, when I took my job, I went around and interviewed everybody, and there was a team of like 4 researchers that worked for like 3 or 4 months on something that had no impact whatsoever. I said, sorry, we're taking the researchers off that project. That it's not appropriate. Partly it was the responsibility of the researchers too, though. They took, it was basically a team that took the approach of an outsourcing of research. They had the conversation with the product manager. They launched a study that took 3 months to do or whatever, and then delivered the results. It's like, my God, weren't you working with PM all the way along? They should be in everyone. Like even Marty Kagan says that PM should be in every study that a UX researcher does, which I think is crazy because they never get any work done. But they should at least be in enough of them. And if they change their direction in terms of product strategy, damn it, they should have known, right? So I think it's alignment is the other major point as well. But I love the approach of like pulling researchers out when they're not being effective.
And now we have a goal to be the 4th leg of the stool. We can do this. We are out of time. It's lunchtime. And please join me in thanking our panel for coming and joining us and for all their pearls of wisdom. Thank you so much.